All good health habits start with a purpose. They start with a decision. They start with a commitment. So why is that there's so many more calories in this smaller portion of food? It's because of the refining process and the adding of things that are really not that essential for health, but they may taste good. Adequate water intake is one of the most profound influencers of cancer risk reduction. You can see here in the slide, rectal cancer was reduced by 92%. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Preventive Parenting. We have session 4, Dare to be a Daniel, prepared for you today, and I believe you're gonna love this presentation. You're gonna love the content because it's about food, and who doesn't love food? Who doesn't like to eat? We all have to eat, but are we eating for strength? That's the big question. A lot of people will do research and try to figure out, well, what's the healthiest diet? And in fact, that's probably always a trending question on Google. But you can easily become overwhelmed with the different ideas and philosophies of what constitutes healthy eating. And so I believe if we ever want to establish a truth with absolute certainty, we should go back to the Word of God. And guess what? We can do both today. We can look at clinical research and we can look at the Word of God. In fact, we can look at what is arguably the very first clinical research study ever published. That's published in the book of Daniel. This was from the New England Journal of Medicine in 2003. The contributor said, the first published report of a clinical trial has biblical origins. In the book of Daniel, reference is made to the unwillingness of the Israelite Daniel to accept the diet offered by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. And that's not the only research article that cited this as being the original research study ever published. There was also an OB medical journal back in 1995 that said this. Around 600 BC, Daniel of Judah conducted what is widely regarded as the earliest recorded clinical trial. His trial compared the health effects of a plant-based diet with those of a royal Babylonian diet over a 10-day period. And I'll add a little to that as well. It went beyond 10 days, as we'll find out when we go straight to the research and we analyze it and try to figure out what was this diet and was it beneficial? Did it have positive physical effects and positive mental health effects? Because we know we need both of those today, don't we? So let's go there to ancient Babylon. To set the stage for the study, we find that Daniel and his friends had been captured by Nebuchadnezzar's army. They had been taken, probably their parents were left behind or put into slavery somewhere in the Babylonian kingdom, but they were taken and they were made into eunuchs, which was, a terrible thing to befall them. But they decided they were going to purpose in their heart that they would serve God, just like Joseph going into Egypt. Joseph going as a slave into Egypt. He decided he was going to serve the God of his fathers. Well, these young men decided the same thing. They were going to serve God no matter what, and in every aspect of their lives. Now, how do I know that? It's because what is revealed here in the study. Let's take a look. It says in Daniel 1:5, and the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank. Now, that word meat is referring to the whole dietary available. So all the foods that the king was eating, everything at his table, he said, hey, you all can have this as well. Seemed to be kind of a nice gesture, but was it really? Reading back here, and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now, this put Daniel and his friends into kind of a quandary because these things were offered to the Babylonian gods, and they probably were not the most healthful preparations of food. So they decided something. It reads in Daniel 1 verse 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. So there's a decision here. And all good health habits start with a purpose. They start with a decision. They start with a commitment. And oftentimes they end with that. You've heard of New Year's resolutions in which individuals say, yeah, I'm going to do this or do that, starting out in the new year, and then very quickly they decide against it. Maybe they forget to do it, or maybe they just don't have the willpower to sustain that healthy habit, and they give up. But Daniel and his friends did not give up. They purposed in their heart that they were going to serve God in this. To them, this was a spiritual thing. This was not just what is on the plate, but how what is on the plate affects their minds. And it was a very big decision for them to make, because they were in a hostile empire. And they were basically still servants, even though they were going to stand before the king and be his helpers and stand at the court of the king. They were still very much under the realm, under the system of justice and law of the Babylonian kingdom. And for that reason, they could have been executed anytime if they resisted what the king was trying to do, to train them and to teach them in the Babylonian customs. But Daniel decided to go to his overseer, and he requested a favor of him. In Daniel 1, verses 12 through 13, Daniel says, "Prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat," which is a plant-based diet, "and water to drink. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat the portion of the king's meat." Now, I don't know if you recognize this. Daniel has just set up a study, a controlled study, where you have the control group being the youth who ate the king's food, and you have Daniel and his friends as being the experiment group. Well, it sounded like a logical request, and Daniel was granted this. It was only 10 days. It was only a pilot study. And so the overseer thought, well, what harm could it do? So let's let them carry this out. What happened after 10 days? We know the Bible tells us Daniel and his friends were fairer and fatter in flesh than those who ate of the king's portion and drank of the king's wine. Now, that doesn't mean that they suddenly became overweight or obese. It just means that their countenances appeared healthier. They were stronger. They were leaner, but not emaciated as maybe they might have thought. If you don't eat the king's meat, then you're just not getting enough nutrition. But that was not the case. Daniel and his friends excelled in strength. They excelled in all the tests that were put before them to measure the effectiveness of this new diet. And guess what? Ever after, they were able to eat this same way. We may not be captives in the Babylonian kingdom, but nonetheless, we still are offered many things that are not for our own good. In fact, we can eat and drink like kings and queens today, can we not? I'm not advocating any of these things, but they're options for us. They're dietary choices that we could make. We could have the Whopper and eat like a king at Burger King, or the king of beer there, which absolutely not advocating. Go to Dairy Queen, or even drink like a rock star. It's advocated to do. And I believe we even have more choices than Daniel did at Nebuchadnezzar's table, because just what the king was giving wine to drink, well, we can greatly outdo that just by walking down the supermarket aisle that's selling the juices and the sodas and all these things. Now, probably 99.9% of all these things are unhealthy. They're just laden with sugar. They're not a good dietary choice. But we can definitely eat like royalty today, can't we? If that's a decision that we make. But perhaps that we should follow the concept of purposing in our hearts to eat that healthy diet instead of the king's meat, or the king's portion. And think about that question, because I want to run by a few items that we may consider to be the king's dainties. We're told the king's dainties are deceptive meats, or deceitful meats in Proverbs 23, verse 3. Why is that? Why did Solomon say that? He was a king himself. And why was the royal rich food apparently not as good as the things that were simpler, like the pulse diet, the Daniel diet we'll refer to it as? So the king's dainties. This is a very common little item here, a dessert item that is served in a fast food restaurant. You probably have seen this before and maybe even tasted it before. Now, I'm going to compare this. This is apple pie to the actual apple which originated the apple pie. Okay, we're going to look for calories, we're going to look for disease, risk reduction properties, and all other aspects to compare the two and to make the best choice here between an apple pie and an apple. Now, many of you are already saying, well, I like the taste of the apple pie. Well, wait until you see the different aspects of that apple pie and then make the decision whether or not you'd rather have the apple or the apple pie. First of all, apples are very health promoting. They're a very healthy food. An apple a day really does keep the doctor away, especially in the case of cardiovascular disease. One study found that men who had one serving of apple per day reduced their risk of a fatal heart attack by 19%, and women reduced their risk even greater by 43%. Now, you notice that risk reduction is different for males and females. That is a common thread throughout all research studies. If you look at male and female risk reduction for cardiovascular disease, the one thing that really brings men up to the level of risk reduction that women can also enjoy by doing dietary restriction or dietary changes is to add in exercise. Exercise is absolutely essential for men if they're trying to make headway against cardiovascular disease. So keep that in mind. It's not that the apples are worse for us, it's that we need that sweat of the brow, as it says in Genesis, that we eat our bread with, right? That's how we're benefited. Okay, so let's compare the apple to the apple pie and looking at the nutrition facts labels. I'm gonna have to turn around to see the small print. What we can see though, the calories in that apple are about 65 for one small Granny Smith. Now the calories in that small apple pie are 250. Now keep this in mind, the apple weighs 125 grams. Whereas the apple pie weighs only 77 grams. So there's actually less food mass in that apple pie, yet much, much more calories. So why is that there's so many more calories in this smaller portion of food? It's because of the refining process and the adding of things that are really not that essential for health, but they may taste good. Let's take a look at the satisfying nature of these foods, because some people will say, well, yeah, but I would eat less of that, so, less of the apple pies, so it's okay, because the calories will even out that way. Let's understand a little bit about the physiology of the stomach. In the stomach, there's something called stretch receptors, and these basically are, self-explanatory. When we eat something, it stretches the stomach, and it enlarges the stomach to a certain extent until we say, hey, that's enough. Our stomach feels full. Now, we can overdo it and we can really stretch out the stomach so that our feelings of fullness are actually deceptive if we eat too much on a regular basis. But let's say we just have normal operating stretch receptors, and we go ahead and we put some apples in there. Of course, we should chew them up, but this is just for graphical representation. Let's see how many apples could we realistically fit in our stomach. Can anyone really eat more than 4 apples at a time? I don't know if I'd really want to eat more than 4 apples at a time. I did a study one time. I was in a mall, and we had people come by. I said, how many apples could you eat realistically? And they were like 2, 3, no, probably not 4. But guess what? That only has 260 calories right there. That is nutrient-dense food. And those apples, remember, they are disease-preventing foods. Let's compare that with the hot apple pies. Okay, how many hot apple pies can a person eat? Well, in our little study that we did at the mall, we had people say, well, probably 8 at the most. If I was really hungry, I probably could eat 8. Well, just 4 hot apple pies is over 1,000 calories, and that's just one meal. Okay, so that's at 70 grams a piece. So if we have 4 of them total, that's only 280 grams of food. There's a lot more food stuff put into the stomach with the apples. So potentially we would be more satisfied with only 4 apples as compared with so many more calories in that hot apple pie. Now, I'm not saying that we should never eat a piece of apple pie, but to make that a regular part of our diet, you can see how the calories can add up, can you not? Okay, let's go to another example. Onions. An onion a day will keep everyone away, right? But it really does have a tremendous impact on cardiovascular disease, even more so than the apple. In one study, it revealed a serving of onions a day reduced the risk of a fatal heart attack by 26% among men and 50% among women. So tremendous cardiovascular benefit there with onions. Now, if an onion will keep everyone away, then what will garlic do? Well, yeah, it will really keep everyone away. But garlic is one of the most medicinal items of our dietary options that we can consume. It's amazing. Studies have revealed garlic to be anti-inflammatory, to be anti-cancer, anti-hypertensive, anti-cholesterol, and so many other things, antibacterial, antiviral. And as a very near and dear friend of mine always says, also anti-friend. Her recommendation was everyone just needs to eat it because it's so good for everyone. It would be wonderful. And a garlic a day would do wonders for everyone. And that is the small little clove of garlic. I made a promise in my mind one time. I was giving a seminar back in Arizona. This was probably 7 or 8 years ago, and I said to myself, mental note, I'm always going to differentiate between a clove and a bulb of garlic whenever I recommend the food intake of garlic for medicinal purposes. And this is the reason why. I talked about the benefits of garlic, and a gentleman decided to go home and have a clove of garlic. And he came early. I was setting up my computer for the presentation. He came early because he wanted to talk with me. And as he opened the door, he took a few steps in, his smell preceded him. And I almost took a step back before he even got close because I knew what he had done. And he came up to me, he said, Ron, I'm never doing that again. And I said, what did you do? And I probably took a step back even more. And knowing what he had done. And he said, I took some garlic like you recommended. And I said, okay, how much garlic did you take? He said, you know, that clove thing that you talked about. And I said, no, that's a bulb of garlic. Please never do that again. All we need is a clove or two, the real small, almost thumb-sized pieces of garlic for medicinal purposes. That is sufficient. Much more than that, and we're really going to be overdoing it. And all those around us will know. So I made a mental note I would never again allow people to put themselves through that. So now you know, a clove of garlic is a small piece. It's not the whole bulb. Okay? Garlic, wonderful, beneficial. It's something, as my friend would say, everyone should take it. Very, very much a blessing that God created there for us in the beginning. In the beginning, in Genesis 1:29, God said, see, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food. Oftentimes, experts refer to this as the Genesis diet. Another word for it is the pulse diet, right? Pulse is the word for vegetables or vegetarian, right? So when we think of a plant-based diet, our minds really should be reflected back to the original diet in the perfect Garden of Eden that God had prescribed for mankind. Now, after the fall, God did at least enunciate the need for the eating of the leaves, right? The rough vegetables and that kind of thing. Let's take a look at the benefits of this type of diet, because some people might say, well, it's not really worth it. It's not really that beneficial. I don't really see the need to do it. But let's look at what the research says. Really amazing and well planned out and extensive research study looking at over 50,000 people found that there was a clear distinction between diet type and BMI. BMI is referencing body mass index, or our level of obesity or overweight and obesity. So I'm going to go ahead and go quickly through this. So we're going to start with the diet type that was most likely to bring about the greatest increase of weight. And here it is. The average non-vegetarian, the individual that did not like to eat fruits or vegetables and just rarely ate any of that type of food, their average BMI was almost obese. Obesity is 30 and above. The average here was 28.8. Okay, that was for non-vegetarians. Semi-vegetarians, those were people who did put some fruits and nuts and grains and legumes and vegetables into their diet, but it wasn't the majority of their diet per se. But as we can see, there was already a benefit, 27.5, which is in between overweight and obese. So it's quite an improvement in the body mass index. Let's go to the next dietary group. These were the pesco-vegetarians. Pesco-vegetarians, out of all those who consumed a meat product, were the lowest in terms of BMI at 26.3. That's just slightly overweight. The category for overweight in BMI is 25 to 30. So they were just slightly overweight. So the next group that we're going to study were individuals who decided they were not going to eat animals themselves, but animal products such as dairy and eggs. What we see here is an improvement as well. Lacto-ovo-vegetarians, their average BMI was 25.7, which is only slightly overweight, as we can see here. But out of all these food groups, there was only one type of diet that put people on average in the ideal weight, which is about 18 to 25 in terms of BMI. You ready for that one? Here it is. It was the plant-based vegetarians. Another word for that is vegans, although vegans, there's a little bit of different dynamic to veganism than just being a plant-based vegetarian. But the plant-based vegetarians had a BMI of about 23.6, which is actually very good. It's very healthy. They were not underweight, which some people think, they think of vegans, they think, well, they're malnourished, and I don't really want to be like that. But that's an ideal weight right there, 23.6. That is healthy, almost as healthy as you can get in terms of being in an ideal weight category. Other studies have found that these Daniel diets, at least that include more servings of fruits and vegetables, some of these statistics are from total vegetarian diets, and some of them are just from increasing the intake of fruits and or vegetables. But take a look at these. These diets have been found to reduce the risk of a fatal heart attack by 86%. That was a total plant-based diet. Another one decreased the risk of stroke by 26 to 31%. Another one lowering cancer risk by over 50%. And yet another one decreasing the risk of type 2 diabetes by 293% compared with these other dietary types. That's quite amazing. Now, one of the most important things about a plant-based diet, which you don't get that much in a semi-vegetarian diet, you'll get some fiber from the plant products that you still eat. But a non-vegetarian diet, you get very little fiber because fiber comes from plants. Not only the roughage form of fiber, the insoluble fiber, but also the soluble fiber, which helps with lowering things like cholesterol and detoxifying the bile that's secreted in the small intestine. The average intake of fiber among Americans averages about 11 grams a day, yet the recommended minimum is anywhere from 25 to 30 grams a day. So we are very much deficient as, I would say, as Western society, not just in America, because we eat a lot of these refined carbohydrates and refined plant-based foods that are devoid of fiber, which is such a valuable nutrient. Give you an example of how this process works. So we're going to compare whole grain bread with refined and enriched wheat bread, okay? So first of all, we start out with about 2 to 4 grams of fiber per slice in the whole grain bread. That comes from the wheat itself. Now, when the refining process is over and you have the white bread, we have less than a half gram per slice. That's quite a reduction, isn't it? Especially if you're making several sandwiches. So we can see very easily how we can be deficient in fiber if we're eating highly refined foods. These are termed enriched foods. They're thought to be kind of sophisticated, these new processes that we have because of technology. We're able to make a loaf of bread that stays on the shelf for weeks at a time and does not go bad, right? But is that necessarily good for health? Have to ask ourselves. We know that fiber is essential, but it's not simply about what we eat, because I don't want to leave off only talking about diet. Daniel's plan, so to speak, was not only to improve his dietary intake, but also he refused to drink the wine and the other beverages that might have been offered there at the king's table. What did he choose instead? He said, please give us water to drink. Now, why did he request water? We know water is really beneficial. It's what we thirst for, and it's what the body craves. Whenever the thirst sensation triggers in our brains, it's because the body is saying, please give us water. Give us water to drink. Just as Daniel said, please give me water to drink. And some people will ask, well, I'm drinking this over here or that over here, and it has water in it. Do I get the same benefit? And that's an often asked question. But one study revealed that drinking other beverages, such as fruit juice, coffee, tea, etc., actually increases the risk of a fatal heart attack by 2.5 times compared with those who only had water. One of the reasons is because of all the additional things that are placed into that water beverage, okay? An example here is this soda. We know sodas are containing some water, and they taste appealing, you know. They have flavor and flavorings and enhancements and fizz, and you know what else? They have about this much sugar per serving right here. So obviously those are empty calories. There's no reason for us to put that much sugar into our system when we're just thirsty, you know? Now, if you wonder the prevalence of drinking water as compared with drinking sodas or drinking these other beverages that don't give the same kind of benefit as the water, it's actually quite profound. We, as a nation in the United States, we drink very little water compared with other beverages. It's little wonder that we are suffering from chronic disease, first of all, but we're also dehydrated as a nation. Some statistics vary, but if we compile everything together, we realize that most men are at least mildly dehydrated. And most women, especially over 50 in particular, are dehydrated. Some experts suggest there's about a 75% ratio of dehydration to hydration in our country also. But let's take a look at what the CDC put out a number of years ago. What we find is, validating what I just said, every single age group of men are under the line in terms of adequate intake. And you can see there that also women are, they have some setbacks as well. It's the average may be hydrated, but there are quite a few, at least a third, that are dehydrated. Now, why is that so important? It's because our bodies are mostly water, and we lose water every day. I'm losing water just by speaking. Those are called insensible losses, and sweating, those are insensible losses. And we also sense when we do, we urinate and we lose water that way. And that is a normal physiologic process. And so we need to replenish that water. The brain is 70% water by volume. The blood is 83%. The lungs are 90%, and the human body 60%. I believe that's by weight. Now, the symptoms of dehydration, when they start to progress, we have, kind of mild symptoms at first, and it may be something like fatigue or headache, confusion. Maybe we're not real hungry. We have kind of a flushed, hot sensation in our skin, and heat intolerance because we're not able to sweat adequately to cool our bodies off. Some of the other continued symptoms here are lightheadedness, dry mouth and eyes. The skin becomes loose and lacks elasticity. And if we're looking for a youthful appearance, we want to have our skin hydrated, of course. We also could have stomach pains that could be confused as hunger. You might decide, hey, it's time to go eat, when actually the need is to drink some water to satisfy that thirst. We also have a reduction in urinary output. And whenever we have a reduction in urinary output due to dehydration, we also have increased blood pressure. That's the same mechanism that drives it. So metabolism also slows down and can result in weight gain. Now, water is the original zero-calorie, actually negative-calorie beverage. And we'll talk about a study in just a few moments that shows that water actually helps to burn calories. It's quite amazing, quite profound. But that brings us to a question. What is the adequate amount of intake for water? Especially, my children, are they supposed to drink as much water as I do? Well, there's a general rule of thumb for most adults, and I'll teach this to you that you'll never forget it. 5 to stay alive, 5 8-ounce cups to stay alive, 8 to feel great, and 11 to 12 to rejuvenate. If you just do that, you're going to fall within the wide safety margin of water consumption. Why do I bring that up? Well, it's because there's this concept that water is dangerous, because haven't you heard of water intoxication? And people have died from that. First of all, it's extremely rare, and you have to force yourself to drink that much water. Do you want to know how to avoid water intoxication? I'm going to give you a graphic representation of the key to avoidance of water intoxication. You drink your water by the glass, okay, not by the gallon. That's how you avoid water intoxication. You see, the people who became water intoxicated, and it's kind of a misnomer, what happens is the brain, the electrolytes are diluted to such an extent that your brain starts to swell. But that takes a lot of water in a very short amount of time to do that. The U.S. Army issued guidelines a number of years ago because some of the recruits and soldiers were running long distances, and then they would get back and just guzzle gallons of water at a time. And some of them came down, very few, but some of them came down with this syndrome. And the resulting recommendation was, hey, don't guzzle gallons of water at a time. Most people don't do that. So most people don't get water intoxication. It's really nothing to worry about if you're drinking water by the glass and your aim is some safe area of 5 to 12 to 13 to 14. And that's even giving a very wide margin for error. So that's a very, very safe guidelines. The World Health Organization recommends that men drink about 12 8-ounce glasses and women 9 8-ounce glasses. And as you saw before, I did have the chart showing the recommendations for children. I'll bring those back up again. As we can see here, ages 1 to 3, boys and girls recommended about 4 cups. And 4 cups, those are the 8-ounce variety, okay? And just keep in mind, those cups are referencing 8-ounce cups, okay? They're not the 16-ounce bottles of water that we drink. A child would only need maybe 2 of those bottles a day if we're following these guidelines. Now, what about before the year of 1? Those newborn babes, they don't need any water. Where do they get their liquid from? You see, newborns, their kidney function is not that great, so we should not give them a lot of water. It would be potentially dangerous for them. But if the water is given in the form of their feeding, which the breast milk has water, and if the babies do have to be formula fed, they're getting their water from that source. There's no need for additional water in that young of an age group. And if there is, it would be towards the end of the age of 1, where they might be able to start drinking a little bit, but not as much as the age of 1 to 3. So let's go on. The next age group here is 4 to 8. And as you can see here, it's the same for boys and girls, about 5 cups of water, the 8-ounce variety. Ages 9 to 13, we start to see a little bit of a difference here between male and female, potentially because boys seem to be more physically active. But keep in mind, if your child is physically active, if they're outside sweating, they're going to need more water. And so they would need a little bit more than even what is recommended here. Boys, age 9 to 13, recommendation is about 8 cups. And girls, ages 9 to 13, it's about 7 cups. Now, what about the teens? Well, we see here 11 cups for boys, ages 14 to 18, and about 8 cups for girls ages 14 through 18. Don't think that if you give them an extra cup, they're going to get water intoxication, or if you give them an extra 3 or 4 or 5 cups even, especially as teenagers, they're out hot and sweaty, they may need that. And if you're really concerned about water intoxication, once more, drink water by the glass, not by the gallon. That's really the way to go about it. And don't force yourself to drink just gallons and gallons of water at a time. That's the way to avoid water intoxication. The real issue here with water drinking is not water intoxication, even though that grabs the media headlines. The real issue here is chronic dehydration, which causes a whole host of chronic diseases. Okay? Now, what does adequate water intake do for us in terms of risk reduction? There's a study done, a large amount of participants in this study, over 20,000, that drank 5 cups of water per day. It found that men who did this reduced their risk of a fatal heart attack by 46%. That's tremendous, isn't it? Women, the result was even better, 59%. So you see quite an amazing risk reduction in cardiovascular disease just by drinking 5 to stay alive. Remember, 8 to feel great? But what do we need? We need 11 or 12 or maybe even 13 to rejuvenate, to be at optimal health. But that's even in the smallest category there is a huge benefit in that level of hydration. Well, some would say, I don't like the side effects that come with drinking more water, and that is, of course, increased urination. But guess what? That is normal. That's actually normal physiology. So the World Kidney Research Fund has said that the very best way to avoid UTIs, bladder infections, and even kidney stones is to become adequately hydrated. And they very well know that that's going to increase urination. Don't worry, that is a normal thing. That is a necessary thing. It's given to us by God in our very own physiology so that we will be able to flush out toxins, and is a part of the cleansing that we need to do to ensure adequate function of our body and health of our organs. Now, let's take a look at obesity. We remember that childhood obesity is on the rise, as well as adult obesity. I mentioned that water was the original negative calorie beverage. Here's a study that shows the actual effect of drinking water on metabolism. The study revealed that you have the basal metabolic rate, which is the basic level in which your body just burns calories, even if you're just sitting down or laying down or, sedentary. This is without exercise even. Let's say you drink 2 cups of water. That's 2 8-ounce glasses of water, or 1 bottle, which we usually measure our water intake by. We see a 30% increased metabolic rate, and that change lasted over an hour. So we have about an hour of 30% increased metabolism. That sounds like going out and exercising, right? It's profound. There are some soda pop manufacturers that say we're the original 0-calorie beverage. Well, water is the original negative calorie beverage. I don't think you can really top that, right? The researchers went on to say that if you just had about 6 glasses, 8-ounce glasses per day, you would burn the energy equivalent to about 5 pounds of fat per year. That's pretty cool, huh? Especially if we're looking to lose weight. Water is an excellent choice. Now, what about skin health? I did mention that mild dehydration causes a loss of elasticity in the skin, and it is apparent, it's visible. You see more fine lines and wrinkles. There was an email that went around, an email chain that went around a number of years ago that had an amazing story about a lady who started drinking water and her wrinkles went away and she became so clear in complexion. I don't know if it's going to happen so dramatically for you, but it definitely is helpful. Water is very beneficial in helping us to stay youthful and healthful, okay? Maybe not as dramatic as this. And it very well may reduce the risk of cancer, because adequate water intake is one of the most profound influencers of cancer risk reduction. You can see here in the slide, rectal cancer was reduced by 92%, breast cancer by 79%, and bladder cancer by 51% because people were adequately hydrated. That's pretty profound, isn't it? Something as simple as water something that we should always have available unless we're dying of thirst in the desert. There should be water nearby for us to partake of. But unfortunately, we may choose to go to the king's table and take hold of his beverages and the wine which he drank. I want to challenge you today. Be like Daniel. Purpose in your heart to drink that water that God has given to us, that pure water, which we know is good for us, and to purpose in our hearts. Because, the Bible uses the word heart, but it's referring to our mental faculties. Believe it or not, water has a tremendous influence on positive mental performance. A number of studies have revealed that when we're dehydrated, changes take place in the brain. Even mild dehydration can actually shrink the brain measurably. Brain cell volume can decrease by anywhere from 10 to 15%, and overall brain mass can decrease by almost 1 whole percentage point due to mild dehydration. What happens? Well, we can become more irritable, more excitable, more prone to excitability, which addictions would fall into that category as well, through mild or even progressing into more severe forms of dehydration. And one thing I didn't mention is severe dehydration is deadly. It's dangerous, especially for the elderly. I can remember the very first presentation I'd ever given on anything health related was because of a situation I encountered in nursing school. You see, there was a gentleman, his name was Mr. B, that's who I remember, and I had to do a therapeutic nursing communication log assignment with this man, so I had to sit and talk with him, and then I had to analyze everything he said, write it all down as much as I could verbally recall, and analyze it for therapeutic nursing interventions. And if you're a nurse, you know about this assignment. It's not one that we really look forward to. But nonetheless, I got to know Mr. B pretty well, and I enjoyed taking care of him. I gave him his water. I helped him to get up and walk around. I gave him his food. It was very basic nursing. That was my first nursing class. But about a year and a half later, I was working in the hospital, and I was taking some supplies into an ER. And I happened to look over, and who do I see in one of the little bays there on a stretcher but Mr. B? And I walk over to him, and I see he's not moving. It doesn't look like he's even really breathing. What's going on here? Why is he in the ER? I ran over to the charge nurse, and I say, what's going on? He was my patient in nursing school. And she says, well, he got dehydrated. I said, what? He just didn't drink enough water? How could that be? Could dehydration put someone into such a state of disability that they could be almost, comatose? And sure enough, it's one of the top admitting diagnoses for Medicare is dehydration. And to make matters worse, even if they're adequately rehydrated, elderly individuals are much more likely to die before a year is out after that bout of dehydration. So it's very, very dangerous. Well, how does this come about to my first health lecture that I had given? Well, a number of months later, I was approached by my nursing professor. I was still in nursing school at this time, and she asked me, Ron, would you be willing to, I know this is not part of the curriculum and you're not going to get graded on it and you're not going to get credit for it, but would you be able to come to a retirement center? We got a grant to do health education there and talk about the benefits of drinking water. I said, sure, I'll take it. No questions asked. I wanted to do it. Why? Because I thought of Mr. B and I thought, hey, if I can help those people, then maybe I won't see them in the ER next time, So I did all this research and studied and I went to the bookstore and bought a whole stack of books. This was before there were a lot of resources on the internet. I'm dating myself. But I got everything I could find on the benefits of drinking water and proper hydration. And I studied and I put a lot of time and effort into this presentation. And got to the point where I was ready to go and present before this retirement community. And so here I come. I had purchased this large case of waters, and here I come walking in with my handouts and my case of water, and I go through the first set of double doors and then through the next set, and I look around, where's everybody? Well, there's my nursing professor over there, and there's one lady who looked a little bit disoriented. I think she forgot to leave when everyone left for breakfast. But nonetheless, it was an audience. And so I said, here, have a bottle of water, have a bottle of water. I gave my presentation. There were no questions except one. My nursing professor said, Ron, I can tell you put a lot of time in this, into the research and even these handouts and everything. Will you come back next week? We'll postpone the next speaker. Will you come back next week? I said, sure, I'll be glad to. And so here I come back 7 days later. And I walk through the first set of double doors. And before I even step in the second, there's even people outside the door. I walk in and the place is packed. It's packed. Even the management of the retirement center is there. So maybe it was the lady who was a little bit disoriented. Maybe she went around and told everyone. I don't know how it happened, but there was a whole crowd of people there. And I gave my presentation, handed out the waters, and I'll never forget, there were two people, two elderly ladies that came up to me at the end. And they said, young man, we never thought that water was good for us. They had lived their whole lives not realizing the benefits of drinking just plain water. And they said, are you sure about this? And I said, well, look, here's the research here. Here it is. And they said, how much of this do we need to drink each day? And I'll tell you what, that gave me so much satisfaction because I knew that prevention had won the day, okay? You can do that as parents as well. Your children, they may say, well, I don't want to drink water. It's not as good as juice. And that was me as a young lad. I wanted juice, not water. But parents, train up a child in the way they should go. When they're old, they'll not depart from it. That also includes healthy habits. And it's not for just the sake of health, of physical health. It's also for the sake of mental health. Because we know we're in a crisis of mental health. I've mentioned this before. But guess what happened in that original research study? Something very profound happened after long-term proper hydration and proper healthy dietary intake. You see, in Daniel 1:20, the long-term results of the study came in. And it turns out that, as it says here, in all matters of wisdom and understanding, that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better or 10 times wiser. That's 10x, that's not 10%, okay, than all the magicians and all the astrologers that were in all his realm. Now, let me put this in perspective. Babylonia was the world empire at that time, the dominant world empire. The wisest people in the world were located in the king's court, as the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the magicians, the soothsayers, the men of learning were there. And yet these young men were 10 times, 10x wiser than the wisest there were. That would be the triple PhDs, the MD, PhD, JD, whatever you want to put behind your name. These young men were wiser. Why? Because they purposed in their heart to follow God and to give glory to God and to do all things to glorify God. And as Christians, we actually have that admonition, In 1 Corinthians 10:31, it reads, therefore, whatsoever you eat or drink or whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God.